We have a small creek in the forest that we often visit as part of our preschool program. It's maybe about 1 foot deep in the rainy winter season and inches in our dry summer season. So, 2 winters ago, we were down at the creek and I was watching as a child was just throwing twig after twig into the creek. And at one point, he turned around, looked at me, and said, "It's not working." So I asked, "Well, what are you trying to do?" And he said, "Well, I'm trying to stop the water so that I can create a big pool of water." I said, "Oh, so you're trying to create a dam, but throwing the little twigs at the creek isn't working. What else could you try?" And he said, "Oh, I know. I could try rocks." So he goes away. He comes back with this little tiny pebble, starts throwing the pebbles at the creek. And so, of course, no dam got made that day. And, I just thought, well, that wasn't not a big deal, right? We left. We came back another week and he started right back up with making the dam, only this time he had a new idea. Instead of throwing the twigs at the water, he stepped into the water and was trying to place his twigs along the water. And another child approached and asked him what he was doing. And he said, "Oh, I'm trying to make a dam." The other child took a second to look at it and he said, "What you really need is a bigger stick. I'll get one for you." And so the other child went, got a bigger stick, and they started working together. A third child joined them, and they started laying their branches now across the creek. The following week, those three start right back up at it, right? A different job. So some children are in charge of searching for the right branches. Some children are on the edge of the creek, on the bank, kind of handing it to the children that are standing in the creek to place the branches. They start adding rocks. Some of the children notice that there are holes in the dam, and so they get some moss or leaves and they start filling the holes. And after a couple weeks, maybe a month, the children have created such a good dam that they have doubled the height of the water. And so now, for some of our smaller 3-year-olds, that water is coming up pretty high on them. And one child looks at it and says, "I think we need to build a bridge now." I, I'm Nicole Dravillas Fravel, and this is Wildwood Teaching. And my preschooler's dam making process was an example of place based learning. And if you don't know what a place based learning is, I am going to quote David Sobel, who is an environmental educator and a professor emeritus at Antioch University, on his definition of place based learning because I think it's very succinct. He says, place based education is the process of using the local community and environment as a starting point to teach concepts in language arts, mathematics, social studies, science, and other subjects across the curriculum. Emphasizing hands on, real world learning experiences, this approach to education increases academic achievement, helps students develop stronger ties to their community, enhances students' appreciation for the natural world, and creates a heightened commitment to serving as active contributing citizens. Now, place based education has a number of benefits for early childhood. One benefit I see is that it's relevant. Preschoolers are concrete learners. They're focused on what they can experience, what they can touch. And as young children are just finding their way in the world, their local environment is incredibly important to them. Their school, their homes, their backyards. And Dr. Diane Cashin, who was a passionate proponent of emergent and outdoor education, wrote, "What becomes the content of learning should have meaning to the children. And place-based learning encompasses what is here and now and accessible to young children." Second benefit is that it is interactive and hands-on. Place-based learning is rooted in project-based learning. The idea is to positively affect the environment or the community, right? Large sense of environment, not just nature. And then young children are engaging in purposeful learning. Rather than just acquiring abstract skills, they get to apply those skills in meaningful context. It's the difference between, say, like growing a bean seed in a plastic bag and sowing bean seeds in a garden where the point of the garden is that you are then going to use the produce to feed people. Right? Third benefit is that it is personalized and flexible. The very nature of place based learning is that it is rooted in a specific location with a specific community. Therefore, it is individualized curriculum. The community includes the children that are in the program. So they get to shape the direction of the learning. I'll give you an example. And so, because we're outside and because seasonal changes happen in similar ways every year, right? The same trees have their leaves change color, lose their leaves, right? The same animals are in our habitat. The same animals might hibernate or go dormant over the winter. Right? Because we're observing the same changes year after year, we have projects that repeat year after year. Right? However, every time those projects repeat, they are different in some ways. So, for example, we plant in our garden every spring, which means that every winter, every February coming up here, we plan our garden. And that planning process looks different every year. The shape of our eventual garden looks different every year. So if the children have been interested in investigating soil and mud, then we might take some measurements of soil health and amend the soil before we plant. At times, the children have been really focused on the weather, and so that means that we might be measuring soil temperature or tracking the movement of the sun to look at shade and light patterns in our garden before we plant. Some years the children are really focused on growing vegetables that we can eat. Some years they want to grow pollinator gardens. Last year, they decided that they wanted their garden to look like a rainbow when they were finished. So we chose plants specifically so that when they were all in bloom, we would have those rainbows of colors. Um, Place-based learning can be formal or informal. It can be something that is suggested by the teacher and nudged along each step of the process, or like the dam building that I talked about at the beginning of this video. It can be something that is wholly child-led and just supported by the teacher. It can be quick, right? It can be a one-time 20-minute thing that happens, or it can be a longer term project that you're returning to day after day, week after week. So, one of my favorite examples of place-based learning, because it involves it all, it started as teacher-led, became a child-led activity. It has a formal part to it, some informal parts to it. Were the forest surveys that the children did last spring. So our forest surveys started with some questions that the children had about how the trees were changing in the spring. So my colleague suggested to the children one day that we do a survey, that we just find out which trees or how many trees in the forest are had sprouted new spring leaves. And so the children each had a clipboard, paper, pencil that they took as we hiked into the forest. And as we were hiking, every time they saw a tree with new spring leaves, they just put a little tally mark on their paper. Then when we arrived to a clearing where we were going to stop for the day, we all sat down as a group and the children counted up their tally marks. How many trees did you find? They compared and contrasted their results. I found more than you. I found less. Or I found a whole bunch here. Or here's where I didn't find trees that changed leaves at all. And so along the way, right, the children were learning about data collection, possibilities for doing that. They were learning about counting. They were learning how to compare relative values of numbers. They were learning about biological science. And they had such a great time with this activity that they started to suggest new activities. So, you know, so many times we walked in the forest with our clipboards and we counted the number of evergreen trees. We embarked on a journey to determine how many new flowers we had, and then what colors the flowers were, and which colors did we have more of. And as we were going, the children started to develop their own methods of data collection. So, for example, for that flower survey, some of the children decided that what they were going to do was they were going to take crayons and make little colored circles on their paper, one circle for each color. And then as they were walking, all they did was they created a spoke, kind of like a petal, on a flower along the color, so that if they found an orange flower, they put a little line next to the orange or on the orange circle, so that they could then count it at the end per color. Um, and then at one point, one group of children um, dubbed themselves the nature protectors, and they were counting all of the trillium in the forest so that they could let people know not to step on them. And so I then suggested, would you like to make a map of where we can find all the trillium, because then people could definitely locate them more easily. So we threw map making in there, and the children learned about directions. And then as a culminating project, the children created our own little guidebook of the forest, where they each had like a page of specific flora, fauna in our forest, and drew them, wrote the information that they had collected, so that we had a guidebook about the forest. So then we added in other applications, right? We had literacy applications. We had some map making. We had geography. We had art through their drawing. And these were all applications that they learned through the place-based process. So as you can see, place-based learning can be an incredibly powerful way for young children to connect to their communities and to themselves, and to gain confidence in their ability to affect change in their communities, all while gathering academic skills. So I challenge you to take a look at your location, explore it with the children, see what you can come up with together. What does your place offer? for what it can teach your preschoolers. And then let me know. Comment on this video, send me a message through Facebook, through Instagram, through the Wildwood Teaching newsletter. And then I will see you here next week for another free episode of Wildwood Teaching. I will see you then.